Questions? Well, let me begin with a question. Gary, when you are looking at a particular situation or a site, and you describe it as an art, how do you really drill down on whether it's going to be philanthropy versus CSR versus shared value, and how do you present that to those who have to buy in the corporate suite and in the C-suite?
Well, I think I made some references to this during my talk, that I would say shared value becomes very straightforward because if there's a need to mobilize an existing technology but create far greater access, or develop a new technology and create access, which is even a more challenging undertaking, that needs to be done through shared value. We wouldn't be in a position to develop a product, so to speak, purely on a philanthropic basis. It wouldn't be a use of corporate investment funds that we could potentially justify. On the other hand, we do give away a lot of product, millions and millions of dollars worth of product, so that is feasible for existing products. But if you want to get involved in a real development initiative and achieve scale, if you're dealing with disaster response or humanitarian relief, that lends itself to donation. Often, like for Ebola, we donated over $1 million worth of protected needle devices for blood drawing and infusion therapy procedures because that was vital for being able to diagnose and care for patients. You may recall in the Ebola epidemic that something like 75–80% mortality rate. Well, a big part of that high mortality rate was the fact that patients weren't being diagnosed and they couldn't be hydrated. And in some circumstances, the mortality rate dropped as low as 25% when basic procedures could be performed. Excuse the digression, but that's something that lends itself to philanthropy. But if you had to develop a new type of device, as we're doing with the Odon device, you can't do that purely through philanthropy. It's going to be 8 years of development effort, over $20 million of investment just to get it to market, and then a huge amount of investment just to be able to get the access to patient populations. CSR is somewhere in between. CSR deals with the expertise of a company. And by the way, it doesn't only have to be technology-related expertise or procedurally. It could be, as mentioned in the prior presentation, around particular functional skills. And that also becomes fairly straightforward where we believe there's an opportunity to use the institutional know-how of the company, which I actually believe is our greatest asset, even more than our products, is the institutional know-how. And I feel as though, I think we collectively feel that when you possess an asset, you have to deploy it. And I don't mean here for profit purposes. It's the same thing with us as people. If we have certain skills and talents and we don't use them, we're foregoing the opportunity to do what we probably were created to do. Likewise, organizations are in a similar circumstance. So if we have the expertise and there's a need around it, we'll typically deploy that through CSR.
Thank you. Dr. Ertz, have you noticed, and do you have examples of when you can parachute in a particular person or a particular business level of a business acumen in where someone might have asked you for cash or some sort or product, and you said, well, that's not what you really need. What you really need is management. Have you had examples of that where you've sent in the right people to help administer something and you've gotten a result back?
Yeah, I think it's often happening, and we don't get so many times a request for funding or for drugs. The requests are mainly on support and leadership skills, strengthening from our partners, definitely. But a specific example like this one, I think the requests, for example, of one Minister of Health, the one who told me that the NCD department is an orphan department, the request was definitely, can you help us set up a strategy for NCDs? And that is something we then would call upon experts from external experts to develop that together with the people on the ground. And that is something that is much more appreciated than anything else, I think, than money.
Can I add one quick comment on this that I learned because I work with a lot of nonprofits helping them raise funds? A very wise head of state once said that if you ask for money, you get advice, and if you ask for advice, you get money. So it's much better to ask for advice.
Okay. We have a question over here. Yes.
Hi, Brenda Colatrella with Merck. First of all, thanks to the panelists. Those were really interesting descriptions of how you're moving towards shared value and actually engaged in shared value and true shared value for that matter. I'm just curious to know if in initiatives where you've try to not combine, but include both philanthropic contributions as well as shared value contributions. And I think I heard Gary mention one example. Or where you're bringing expertise to a particular initiative. So you're actually sending people to that initiative. Or where there's the potential for a customer or someone who could be defined as a customer involved in the initiative. Have you run into any legal and compliance concerns internally which have created obstacles? This is something that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. And I don't know if it's because we're a US-based healthcare company, which is a little bit different than the panelists, but I'm just trying to get a handle on, have you dealt with legal and compliance issues in any of those three scenarios, and if so, how did you navigate them?
Well, the short answer is yes. But it's not issues we've dealt with. We've dealt with worries from our lawyers, because what your law department is paid to do is think about anything that could possibly go wrong, no matter how remote the circumstances. And there's not a appreciation for gray, and by definition there's a little bit of gray here. And I actually think because of that, it's actually interfered with, I'm not talking about on BD, we've been able to work this through on the BD side, but it interferes with progress, because the whole concept even of shared value, of claiming that you're going to do something for societal impact that also has business impact, is inherently the right thing to do, but gives lawyers the jitters, because they think that you're going to try to portray something that's profit-making. By definition, it has to be, as something that's good for society, which is, in fact, the purpose. I would say what's critical here, I mean, all these multinational companies abide by a standard of ethical responsibility that I believe exceeds any other sector. And I think particularly in medical technology, my experience, it's being done because also we want it to be that way, not only because the regulations exist. I mean, companies like Merck, Novartis, Novo, BD, these are extremely ethical institutions. And abiding by that set of standards could, if it's taken to the extreme, cause us to not do as much good in the world as we're otherwise capable of doing. It's like anything else. Laws are, in my opinion, made to regulate those who are most likely to engage in malfeasance, and they have a byproduct of potentially restricting what happens to those who don't intend to engage that way. The way we've worked through it, among other things, philanthropy is philanthropy. You cannot tie business outcome to it. So that is absolutely clear. We will never look for any type of commitment of any form in exchange for philanthropy. Dealing with healthcare professionals, there's a very established set of codes that companies in the medical technology sector abide by there, and we don't cross that line, nor would we intend to cross that line. But we do engage in public-private partnerships where we're working with government in collaboration, governments around the world, to achieve outcomes. And that's constructed in very well-defined memorandums of understanding and governance documents that specify how it's going to work. And again, if it's CSR or philanthropy, in this case CSR, there's no commercial gain that can be associated with it, and that's underwritten into the documents. And then you just have to get the lawyers comfortable with the idea that shared value creation is commercial. That's the whole intent. It's a better, more enlightened way of engaging in commercial practice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Comment for that, since we are in this wonderful country. So we do have a very big presence here in the United States as well. So even if we are not US-based, then we have to play by your rules. So we pay our lawyers to give us advice, and the advice that they gave us in relation to some of these case studies I shared with you, that actually use the shared value terminology, because we talk about how in the process of doing business the way we do, we generate value to society and to our business. And our advisors, or our legal advisors, were then saying, well, you can't talk about value because that seems to be something that is of value, meaning money. So, and we said, but that's what it is. And then one of the smart young ones, the lawyers, was saying, But then you can say benefit. Benefit is fine. So now we talk about benefit to society, at least when we're here. But otherwise, we generally use the shared value terminology. But I think it's interesting because it actually addresses a very important distinction that I think is unhealthy, frankly, namely that we believe that to be of value, it has to be money. We're talking about a healthcare system that is increasingly being directed by flows of money rather than flows of care for people, by people. So we have to accept the fact that we are commercial businesses, so we have to be profitable, which is why we do have a philanthropy part. I think we all do that, but it has to be commercially attractive. So to address that gap that I was mentioning before, we started with having an access to care strategy, and that really didn't fly in the organization because that was all about philanthropy. But when we then defined what are the gaps that we need to achieve in order to serve the number of patients that we think is our share, if you will, of the patients that is in the population, then it became a business strategy. And then we have the whole organization mobilized behind achieving that target that we've set. And that gives an entirely different energy. So I think we have to accept the fact that we are motivated by the financial instruments, but it also can be a constraint.
Can I make just one other quick comment on that?
Please do.
I will say that the role of the lawyers, though, is essential because the boundaries that they set enable us to continue to advance this work, minimizing the risk that some, maybe with other motives, come in and try to mischaracterize it, because that mischaracterization could end up freezing the activity. So at the end of the day, we listen very closely to what our lawyers have to tell us. We collaborate with them because it enables us to continue operating this way.
Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
Seema Kumar from J&J, yeah, and she wanted me to just let you know that they are working on the incorporation of the SDGs into the company's processes and procedures overall. But one of the questions I had, and I think it's particularly directed maybe to you, Suzanne, was when you talked about actually changing the articles of business of the company, it sounds like that was something that was done very overtly and very deliberately and very publicly. And I'm just wondering if that's the case, if you can just share a little bit on how that happened.
Yeah, well, that was a decision made by the board of directors. So they were I think the trigger for them, and that's probably a relevant story, is we were doing business in Russia when the Soviet economy was imploding. And that meant that we were not getting paid for the delivery of medicines. But we decided to continue to deliver the medicines because there are people who rely on it. So you can say that was an act of faith on our part, that maybe we expected that one day we would be paid, we would get our money. But our leadership at the time had to face investors who were saying, but that surely seems to be bad business. And so our leadership was deciding that even if we're a listed company and we do listen to our shareholders, we also want to buy that license to operate, if you will, with the shareholders, to say we will sometimes make decisions that on the short term may seem like there's not the direct profit. But that is because we believe that in the long term, we will deliver a competitive profit for you. So you can rest assured that we will be, laser focused on that, but the way to get there might be a different one. So that is why it was written into the articles to say, to give a clear statement to the investors. And it was, of course, brought to the attention of the shareholders at the annual general meeting. And there was a vote of yes. And of course, there's a small caveat to that, because we've talked about foundations. And you probably know that Novo Nordisk has a very special ownership, because we are owned by a foundation. So the foundation has majority voting rights, which of course made it easier. But I would say that the institutional investors, the professional investors, really appreciate this way of doing business, because they can see that, well, they are getting the money, and we are strengthening the business. We've quadrupled the value of the company over the last 15, 16 years or so. So they have no reason to complain.
Thank you. I'm going to bring this to an end. We've got a 15-minute break, but I'd love a round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much.
Check, check. Microphone check. 1, 2. Almost. He's already in there. I'm just dealing with this. I know I'm using it. I'm using it for this. Could you press the they're not labeled, which is really frustrating.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Hello, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm going to adjust your levels a little bit. Give me just a moment.
Sure. Is it coming through clearly?
Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Okay, could you say something again, please?
Yep. I'm just wondering if it's coming through clearly.
Yeah, it is. There are folks talking in the room right now, so it's a little loud, but we can hear you. You can hear us just fine?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly when you're talking to the mic. And are you getting a good video link as well?
Sorry, hang on one moment. Could you repeat that?
Are you getting a good video link as well?
Yeah, it looks great. You will not be able to see the
Okay.
whole room, I'm sorry to say. If you want to watch the webcast, you can. You'll just have to mute your audio because there won't be sync between the video conference audio that you're in and the webcast audio that everyone else is seeing.
Yeah, I think I'll just stick with this to make it simple. But when there's a couple of other people speaking, can you make sure that they get the mic as well when they're speaking?